I'm going to kick it off now and remind everyone that we are recording this session and only the panelists will be recorded. I believe that if you are viewing, you can just enjoy it and don't have to worry about being a part of that. But the panelists do. And so I will waste no time in getting us started in this conversation. We so appreciate you spending some of your Sunday with us. And we understand this is an international conference, so it may even be Monday in some locations. So welcome from tomorrow. Love to have the future with us. My name is Amon Milner, and I'm an associate professor at the Olin College of Engineering in Boston, Massachusetts, USA. And I am a part of the Making a Hip Hop panel to moderate. I am a part of one of the research projects that one of our fine panelists is a part of. So I won't spend too much time introducing myself and what I do because I'm here to highlight all of the great researchers, activists, artists that we have on the panel today. So I'm going to give most of my time to these wonderful panelists who will introduce themselves after I do a little housekeeping and let you know that we're being recorded and give you a few operational definitions of how we'll be talking about making in hip hop. These words carry a lot of meaning. And so, for the purpose of our panel, we wanted to give you a definition that we all sort of agreed upon. And if we deviate from that description, where we want to expand upon what is defined by making or hip hop, then we'll do that when it's time for our Q&A. So just to center everyone who's watching, what do we mean by hip hop? Because if you've heard any songs, people will tell you everything from hip hop is life to hip hop is dead. So we have to choose something in between those two. And we're going to take an approach where we want to have a very expansive view on hip hop and start with some of the elements that got hip hop started. For those of you that aren't familiar with hip hop beyond the musical art form, where you might hear people rapping or emceeing, one of the elements of hip hop. As you heard with the song we were playing at the start of this panel, The Message, there's also a DJ that puts a beat behind the people. And the act of DJing, disc jockeying, is a technological act. There was even a mixer invented to be able to put two different beats together. And when you do that, you have things called break beats that invented a whole form of dancing called b-boying, breakdancing, b-boys and b-girls. So some of the elements from emceeing, being a master of ceremonies, a microphone commander, however you want to call it, someone who's talking over the beat or rapping, the beat by the DJ, the people who are dancing to the music, and the people who express and capture the culture through an art form that is typically graffiti, but is also expanding and evolving. So those are some of the basic elements of hip hop, and we honor those and bring those into the panel. Also with a fifth element about knowledge of self and the righteousness and expression through music, and how do you, as part of a culture, express who you are, where you've been, and where you're going. Sometimes that's captured in the music, historically, from the message in the 1980s to the music that's being made now, the remix of Fight the Power that's talking about today's struggles in the United States and around the world. Hip hop is a global phenomenon. We understand that if you're tuned into our panel from afar, that you may have a different take on hip hop based on how it's expressed in your locality, because it is a global phenomenon these days. And we like to think about all of the encompassing aspects. And we want to touch on that in the panel because entrepreneurship is a part of hip hop. The recording industry, making videos, production, and also all of the elements from fashion to designing of the art and the part of the cover art of albums that are created. And all of those elements we want to be able to bring into this space because hip hop is very expansive and there are generations of the genre. Where did it start in history? And what does that tell us? Where are we now? Where is it going? So we wanted to have a space to talk about what is hip hop. It's evolving and growing, what it is now, what it's been, and we will hopefully have time to touch on each of those just a little bit, but we wanted to ground you in what we mean by hip hop, and we'll give further nuance to that discussion as we continue. We also have a term making in our panel description that is not intuitive and is spoken about in different ways outside of the FabLearn community. So we wanted to just define that term. And we want to start with making is not necessarily creating anything from scratch, because if we draw from the hip hop culture, that genre was born out of another music genre. It didn't start music. It is remixing. It is taking different elements of things and making something new to express yourself. So making, how we're defining it, is taking different materials and making something that can be communicated. It doesn't have to be music. An artifact that comes from your brain into something that can be shared with others, whether it's on a computer screen or whether it's in a clay pot that borrows the design from traditions back to Native Americans. We want to embrace making as anything that can be brought from one's head to something that can be shared, and you can have other people have their interpretation, remake, remix, remaster, reproduce, and have conversation, and the learning that is involved with that in its distinct opposition from how an educational system in the United States is traditionally cast as an expert having knowledge in their head and being communicated to someone by depositing knowledge. Making involves hands-on about creation and sometimes even challenging the status quo. The hip hop community and culture has been a tool for challenging establishments, challenging what is there and creating new structures, and making is also a space where that can happen, where we're challenging the education model by introducing making into education. And we have panelists who will now introduce themselves that are heavily involved in introducing where these two things that we just defined overlap. And we'll start with Sharon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. My name is Sharon de la Cruz. I'm an artist, educator, and activist from the Bronx, so I always have to throw the X up. Basically, at this point, I just say I draw with technology because a lot of my work ranges from like comics to sculpture. So that's just a little bit of a taste. You can see that in the slideshow. And so, you know, it's yeah, so basically what I do is just draw with technology, and I care very, very deeply, especially because the way making came into my life was through art making, right? Like I was already making art and I love technology, and putting those two things together, I realized it was a lot of like, I was decolonizing what I had learned. So there was a lot of unlearning there and a lot of relearning. So that's super uh, dear to my heart, and I'm currently the Director of Sustainability at the Point CDC in the South Bronx.
Thank you, Sharon. Next slide, please, DJ.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Dando. I'm an assistant professor of communication arts and literature at St. Cloud State University in St. Cloud, Minnesota, which is about an hour out of Minneapolis. I am the director of the communication arts and literature program, which is essentially a secondary education program. And my research, love, life, all of that has kind of all come together in my work. I look at the intersection of popular culture, specifically hip hop culture, comics, and Afrofuturism, and then how those intersect for identity formation, civic engagement, democratic education. And there's just some pictures of some of the work that I've been doing over the past couple of months, couple of years. And it's just a pleasure to join all of you today to be on this panel. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. My name is Kevin Rowdy Rousey. I'm an actor, writer, and educator. I'm also a program director here in the downtown Durham Black Space. So just a little bit about Black Space. Black Space is a Afrofuturism digital maker space. We're right here in Durham, North Carolina, as well as Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We offer different workshops in the digital and creative arts. We have videography, music production, spoken word poetry, coding, 3D hip hop or 3D printing. We also have our weekly CYPHER every single Friday right here in downtown Durham. And I just wanted to give a little bit of a Black Space. So I've got a quick, small little video just to show kind of what we do.
Welcome to Black Space. We are an Afrofuturism digital makerspace based right here in downtown Durham, North Carolina. We do beats, we do emceeing, we do poetry, we do 3D printing, we do digital storytelling, and we need your help. Afrofuturism is about merging technology, creativity, and entrepreneurship. Black Space is not your typical STEM program. We do culturally relevant STEAM curriculums centering art and centering people of color who are underrepresented in tech.
Fund my Afrofuture because Black Space is an organization that helps the youth get into their inner music vibe, and it's pretty dope, and you don't really see that too often around Durham.
Black Space, and this is the first place that I've actually felt like I found a family outside of my home.
I went home and I couldn't wait to come back. I find it empowering and amazing.
You should fund Durham and Black Space's Afrofuture because we are bringing the youth to a whole new level with skill sets that have not been brought anywhere else within this area.
So that's just a little bit about Black Space. I've been a part of this since 2016, and it's really been affirming as far as being able to make this space rooted in Afrofuturism. So that's just a little bit about me. Very excited to be here, guys.
Thank you. All right. Dion's up.
Hi, everybody. I am Dion Champion. I am a research assistant professor in the Center for Arts and Medicine at the University of Florida. And my work lies at the intersection of dance and embodied learning, STEM learning, and identity through making, arts and culture to promote health and well-being. I'm an engineer, a dancer, and a dance educator, and a researcher studying learning in informal settings. My focus of my research is typically on the design and ethnographic study of those learning environments, environments that blend STEM, making, and creative embodied learning, particularly for children who've experienced marginalization in STEM, more specifically, African-American girls. I'm currently developing a few projects and programs that engage youth, creatives, and communities in STEM, computation, and art-making experiences, and a research program that interrogates and complicates the way that we think about sense-making, particularly in informal learning spaces like maker spaces, where STEM is not always just STEM. Movement can be more than just movement, and the pathways to understanding are not always linear, normative, or even always predictable. Today, the project that I'm going to be pulling from is the Hip Hop Making Project, which is a 3-year design project that I'm working on with a couple of colleagues that are on this panel that's really aimed at creating understanding learning environments that integrate interdisciplinary computational making practices and the cultural expressive practices from hip hop. So we're working in 3 different cities across the country, Gary, Indiana, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we're working with youth to collaboratively develop and design their own interdisciplinary STEM-based computing hip-hop projects.
Thank you, Dion. We have, I'm honored to be a part of that project too. And I believe Dion could introduce it more eloquently than myself. So I yielded the floor. And she mentioned that the project is in multiple locations, and understanding that hip hop takes different shape in different localities, regionally, as well as hip hop is a guiding force for that research project, because research and how it's done and how knowledge is generated and how communities participate in research is also different regionally. And so like that's one of the making in hip hop connections there, even before this panel started. But I do want to bring that beat back for Mari, because we need to run that back because one of the slides was passed over, so we can introduce one of our last final fine panelists. So can we bring back the screen and give Mari the slide?
Hello, everyone. First and foremost, I'm really blessed to be on this panel. Thanks a lot, Brian and Aman for having me. And these panelists are amazing. I'm actually just sitting here wondering, what am I doing here? And well, I can tell a little bit about myself. Born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, to a family of musicians, singers, ministers. So I essentially grew up in the church. Went to Williams College and graduated with a degree in psychology. After that, worked in finance for about 7 months till I said, this is not for me. I need to get more in touch with the community. And so my way of doing that was through music. So I became an artist and built up a fan base, just creating music with, and what I call it is old soul with brand new vibes. And so I did that and built an artist career for about 4 years or so. Played South by Southwest, played the A3C Festival down in Atlanta, got a music placement and Comedy Central show, Broad City, all these different accolades that would, point to a successful artist. However, just on the back end of things, the financials didn't add up, and the channels through which I was promoting myself as an artist through the tech platforms like Spotify, Instagram, got me more intrigued into how they were structured and how they were creating these stars and celebrities. And so to that, I became more interested in software engineering, and even more so interested in teaching people how to build platforms like this, underrepresented folks in particular. So you're talking about a hard pivot from, a career in music that could have been quote unquote successful, but, taking that pivot to work towards something greater that inspires change. And I feel like a lot of that is in tech, it's in software engineering. And so, this is where I am now. And I'm a coding instructor at Morehouse's bootcamp, Momentum at Morehouse. And I'm very, very excited to be here and having this conversation with you all.
We're very excited to have you as well. You definitely belong here. With the background like that, it's super important to help us discuss the topics that we're here to tackle as a panel. For the audience, I'd like to introduce some of the larger themes that we're going to try to touch on. And we want to talk about the intersection of making and hip hop with respect to place and identity. Also about how the two communities and the places that they occupy have intersections and how they're integrated and how they can be, as well as claiming space and making sure that people that are excluded can be included in any of the areas that we're discussing. So I would like to have each panel have an opportunity. So the way we structured our questions and our flow is to have a few panelists sort of tackle one of the bigger questions and have a little longer time and get through those. And then we could all riff off of each other, as well as integrate questions that we see from the chat. So we have someone watching that. So if you feel like we're missing something, or you really want to hear these wonderful people talk about a topic, we're going to try to give space for that. So I'm going to start with the first question and direct it towards two of our esteemed panelists. This one is going to be hopefully Rowdy and Dion tackle one of the topics, which is STEM and computing, and has a history, as well as hip hop has a history. And what are some of the, what do the histories tell us about places where they might overlap, where they are overlapping, where they should or where they could? And what might new possibilities be? What has been ignored that might be picked up in the future? So how do we integrate these two spaces that we're talking about? How have they been integrated, or how might they be in the future from your respective perspectives?
I can start with that. I think the first thing to really point out and acknowledge is that hip hop has a history in hacking, right? Like the first block parties that DJ Kool Herc started were he created the sound by plugging into the light posts and the electrical systems in the city in order to create the boom that created the beat, that created the vibe, that created hip hop. And so, you know, building on that acknowledgement and that knowledge in the programs that we've developed, even in the project that I was just talking about, we looked at those kinds of connections to kind of think about the evolution of hip hop and the evolution of technologies and making, and how those things overlap. How they overlapped in the past, how they overlap in the present, and what the possible futures are for those overlaps. In the project, we challenged our participants, who were youth that ranged in age. Really, the camp was designed for ages 9 to 14. We ended up with kids that were 6 to 16. And we challenged them to create computational hip hop projects to share at their own block party. And some of the work that they did in integrating the ideas behind hacking and making and integrated STEM and computation were just amazing. We had kids that created a DJ Makey station, interactive station, where they took cardboard, aluminum foil, and wires and 2 laptops and created a battle station that 2 DJs could face off at their block party with different sound clips, sound effects, music, beats that would play in the background when you touch a different part of the board, as if it was a real, you know, turntable. So not only do things like that connect them to the history, like they had, if I don't know if you really saw the pictures that were up when I was making my introduction, there was a picture of the Makey station on there. They actually had vinyl albums as a part of a button that would push to create a sound effect. Just allowing them to bring in that history and understanding and to push it to the next level of where it could go in the future was really exciting. It also, you know, in working with the children in that program, we also discovered new elements of what hip hop really could be beyond just DJing and b-boying, because, you know, we did the breakdancing and we, you know, taught them what a turntable was. Like, these are kids that were born in 2008 and 2006, and like they looked at a turntable and they were like, oh my gosh, what is this thing? They spent like an hour just putting the needle on the record and trying to find where the next song started. And they were fascinated by that whole process. But they also pulled in new ideas like beat making and using what's available and remixing, which is a part of making as well as a part of hip hop. The interactivity and call and response of working with a crowd and trying to get people to move the way you want them to move. Freestyling and improvisation, like all of these things are overlaps. And this idea of all of it pointing toward an authenticity or social justice message that they were also trying to get out there. Those were important things that they pulled out as elements that were relevant to both making and STEM and hip hop.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. And just kind of going off that from my perspective, and again, how I've been looking at the elements of hip hop again from our history: 1 for the DJ, 2 for the MC, 3 for the b-boy, 4 for graffiti. What we're kind of doing over here is focusing on that 0 point, or that 0, which we talk about the cipher, and kind of bringing the cipher into the classroom and having these dynamics of hip hop culture being present in all of the different topics that we're able to cover. Specifically in Black space, we've had a conscious coding program where we've had several different young women aged from about 12 to all the way to about 17, where we come in and see ourselves in the classroom. And what we're really trying to do is really bring what exudes exudes the hip hop culture, and make our students feel as if they are a part of this learning process, not just kind of giving you what you feel as I'm the master, I'm the teacher, but really bringing that like cosmopolitan environment where we're going off of each other. So one of our biggest programs right now when it comes to coding or our 3D digital printing, we're bringing everyone in together and allowing that co-collaboration to reflect and kind of see ourselves. So when it comes to coding, are we developing a regular Flappy Birds video game? Are we doing an Afrofuturist video game put out into outer space, trying to save ourselves from the patriarchy? Just an example, but that's where I see definitely the intersectionality of hip hop and STEM. And also on Dion, you made something. You're a dancer as well, so I know STEM, science, technology, engineering, but in Black space, we also like to put the A in there. We have a STEAM program, so we put the arts as well. So that's definitely something we're bringing in there over here in Black space.
Rowdy, can I just add a little bit to that?
Oh, hello. Yeah, go ahead. I got someone that.
My name is Joshua Rousey on here because Rowdy sent me the link, but my name is Pierce Freelon. I'm also with Black Space. I just wanted to add, kind of building on what Dion was saying, that, you know, you named DJ Kool Herc as technology, the way that he hacked into the system. But I just want to name the African drum as technology. It's a communication tool that we use to communicate over long distances. Let's name the Negro spiritual as coding, the way they use coded language and spirituals like Wade in the Water as a secret way of communicating. Let's name sampling as an innovative technology, a quilting of songs. You know, even the mixer, when you mentioned the mixing of vinyl records, you know, the technology to go from one table to the next, you know, the bootlegging and mixtape, the hood distribution networks, like hip hop and Black music has long been, you know, entrenched in innovative technology models. And I think at Black Space, we certainly, you know, continue that legacy. But thank you, Dion, for mentioning DJ Kool Herc. That was on my mind. And I just wanted to trace that way back to how Black people have been using music as emancipatory technology. Sorry for interrupting. Thank you, Rowdy, for.
Yeah.
So, wonderful.
That was an excellent example of if you have a cipher going on and you have your own rhymes and you're around the circle and you're bringing your own stuff, if one of your people can jump out and add to it, that's just like next level. So we have that going on with the panel. So I appreciate that. I love that. So with this next question, we're going to direct it to Sharon, and then we can also have time for any of the other panelists, because of so much overlap in our efforts, we can also sort of jump in, and if nobody jumps in, I'll pick up the mic and add some stories from a different part of the research project that Dion was describing. So this question to Sharon and the rest of the panel is place. We saw you represent the BX, right? And that's part of your identity. And you said you couldn't not do that when you introduced yourself. Place has been a very important part of constructing one's identity. And we occupy and we move through many spaces. There's concepts of, you know, how you are at school, how you are at home, how you are in a third space. So is in a cipher, in the DJ booth, in these, or in a maker space, right? Or how does place relate to the growth of identity as we move through all these spaces? What are some of the relationships? How does the presence of us being online affect that? So we want to talk about, like, you know, the introducing cross-boundary collaborations, where it used to be the Southern hip hop was confined to those radio stations, and now people's influences are going across wire, and you can have rappers in France influencing people that are picking up in Japan, right? So how is place, how has it been a part of identity development in maker spaces and in hip hop, and how is online affecting that? And so if you would, you know, share some thoughts about those two topics at the intersection, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, that's a like huge question, and I realized that last night as I'm writing notes, I was like, "Oh, I signed up for that question. Great." Um, so I have a couple of notes, and one is, I lived in Peru for a year. I was on a Fulbright scholarship. Lived in Peru for a year. I ended up doing a lot of mural making with artists, and I did, before then I did like a lot of like tagging before, but never like mural making with people and taking time and a huge process in Peru. And this is Peru 2008, 2009. And so there, when I joined like the hip hop world of Peru, I was like, dang, y'all are really gun ho about this, right? Like they were like the 5 elements of like hip hop, and it was so cool for someone from the Bronx, right? Like who reps it super hard to go to a place that was like honoring the Bronx, honoring hip hop in a way that honestly, like I hadn't seen in such a long time. And I was like, dang, we are cool, but it's not just the Bronx, right? Like now this is something else, right? Like this is something much larger. And that was just like really dope to see, because to me, like it became more what I consider myself like a punk feminist, right? So to me, it was like, oh, that's real punk, right? Like this is kind of like, I felt like 2008 Peru hip hop scene for me felt like, and maybe I'm romanticizing this a bit, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but like it felt like fucking like 1986 the Bronx, and I was like, damn, this is like, it felt super raw, and it still continues honestly to be like super raw in a way that like just gets me really really excited and amped. And I would also like to talk about, so we formed rather, Maripusi Crew Collective, which is like a feminist collective, and we were basically, it's like 4 visual artists of 4 muralists and 1 rapper. And we came together because we were united by hip hop, we were united by feminism. And you would think, I thought, at least back in the day, I was like, how could we vibe on a feminist tip if like I'm, above the equator, you're below, we're supposed to have like these 2 different upbringings and ways of being. And like we totally connected through, unfortunately, like through shitty patriarchy, like we were like, oh no, we have gone through the same thing. And then what does it mean to express ourselves through art making, and and honestly, like not being in the presence of maleness while creating art legally and illegally was just like so liberating and so beautiful. And that we had each other's back, and that we were, honestly, like writing like derogatory things all over as women. Also just was basically like we were reclaiming a lot of space for ourselves. So that's just another way like hip hop really, you know, brought us together. And honestly, and like feminism, right? Like hip hop feminism brought us together. And then there's just one more thing, which is like the romanticizing also of hip hop could be a little bit like tricky as well. And maybe this is not necessarily the space for that, but it was interesting when, I was in Peru and someone tried to call me the N-word, like, but in a way that was like, like hip hop, like respectful. And I was like, no, no, no. So like it was very interesting what translates, what doesn't, in geographical spaces. And then also like, what do I get to be offended at versus not? It's and continues to be honestly a very tricky dynamic. But I thought that was something that we should put forth also as we're talking about geographical spaces, and how sometimes like the language out of context is tricky. It's tricky to navigate.
Thank you for introducing some of the trickier parts of what we're discussing and the global phenomenon and community, and the things that may or may not translate. And identity, there are words that capture identities, and those words can't always be shared. And I do want to defer to some of the other panelists, and just keep my role as a moderator, but I do want to introduce a term that I can't call myself all of the time, which, to Dion's point, is, I'm a very decorated computer scientist, but I'm not a hacker. right? And why can't I be a hacker as a Black man? Because there are things that you associate with that would make me a terrorist, to be honest, right? And hacking and using the skills that I have, because there aren't people that sometimes get to own words, and it's a badge of honor to a lot of my colleagues that can be a part of a hacker space, but that's not a place where I could comfortably be, because I have a name that it comes from Egyptian lore, Amon-Ra, the sun god, and that's also associated with any name that sounds like it has Islamic roots, and darker skin sometimes makes you a target where you're already a problem. And if you are a hacker on top of that, then you are, so I have to disassociate myself with hacker spaces. And so I'm excluded from some spaces, self-exclusion for my own safety. And maker spaces, when we talk about making, that created another term and a different type of space where some of those terms were the same activities, doing the same things that created the first turntable, taking something out of other electronics, putting them together, seeing how they can make something new. Again, the making and the remixing in the different title means that different people can participate. So the word and identity and the place, how you label the place, there have been a lot of hacker spaces. There are a lot of maker spaces. Who can participate? Those nuances come up. The terms that you use in hip hop make it difficult for some people because there might be a higher barrier for entry for someone who has a paler complexion than myself. A white rapper may have a harder time getting into a cipher if you do hear certain words that are off limits to their vocabulary, things that they can't necessarily introduce into the cipher because of the same way hacker can't necessarily be associated with me. There are lots of words, you were mentioning one of them, that can't be levied as readily, and that creates a different barrier for one's identity coming into a different community. So it plays on both sides, and we have to talk about some of those as we talk about where the intersections and integrations and how do you get over those, right? So we don't have all the answers, but we do want to introduce that for difficult live wires in these communities.
Right.
Sure?
And I also do think that, like, I don't know if this is necessarily like the correct description, but almost like a safe space to talk about privilege. I know that in the chat there was folks talking about like the dynamics between the teacher and student are being disrupted, and there are ways in which almost like these like maker spaces or hacking spaces could open up a larger conversation for privilege as well.
So we can have another person jump in on that question before we move to the third one. Just wanted to give a little space for some free flowing. And we could always come back. We mentioned that we have the time at the end for Q&A as well as being able to come back and respond to what we've heard. So we can move to the third question, which we'll have Mike and Mari tackle. And that's about making and claiming spaces, because in the music world, in people that may have been disempowered and didn't have full control over their neighborhoods and what would happen to them, and music was a place to claim space, claim an identity, come together, construct futures. And when we think about, we talked about how some of those spaces can also exclude people, right? And can include people. So we wanted to bring hip hop and making into the claiming spaces conversation and talk about some of the other elements that come with sort of making that relates to STEM, where we have licensing, we have open source in the STEM space, and how do you give credit to people? How do you shout out people in technology? And we also have, how do you do that on the hip hop side? How do you do the right sampling, the right credit, and suggest where things came from and not be someone who is, a biter, right? So you have to have these careful balances. And how do you claim space? How do you give, how do you acknowledge the shoulders that you're standing on? And then also, what role does that play with power and power structures and saying, we're taking this space and I'm building on this movement that others have provided. How does that work with the education system? If we can tie those together, these are all big questions, but we did want to give space to Mike and Mari to talk about where they see some of those areas intersecting, colliding, and so forth.
Mar, you go first, and I'll jump in.
All right. Yeah, this is a really interesting thing to explore. This idea of creating spaces in hip hop, because what hip hop always was, it was that, creating that space out of necessity, right? Having that voice, hooking up those turntables and having the MC speak and do the call and response and giving everybody the space to just share in this energy and collaborate. And there are a lot of parallels with that when it comes to tech, and speaking from a perspective of a software engineer. I'm thinking about this tool that we use called GitHub. And GitHub is essentially where developers not only share their code, but they collaborate and contribute code. It's like, it can be like open source. And so there's a lot of building going on in GitHub. And so something that's really interesting about that is on the main branch of where all the code is, the like main code that gets accepted and pushed and deployed, meaning like these are the apps that we see and stuff like that. That thing is called, they used to call, and they changed it. It used to be called a master branch. And so when I think about hip hop and how it had been this space, or has been and continues to be this space that's created out of necessity, is also a space that has been constantly, perpetually commoditized. And the people in there have been, like the artists have constantly been, in these contracts, a lot of which that mention things about a slave. You have the master recordings, you have the slave recordings, and then you have the person who's tied to it. And so who's owning those master recordings? Well, it's the people with a lot of power, a lot of wealth. And so when you think about software engineering, who's building the technology for artists to even promote themselves on these tech platforms like Spotify, like Instagram? These are people that don't look like the artists that are creatively contributing. And so there are a lot of power dynamics at play here when thinking about who is it that's actually creating the spaces, or who is it controlling the spaces? And then let's bring into the fold the prison industrial context and the promotion of violence and misogyny in the music industry. And so now you see hip hop as just like this moving thing. It's constantly evolving, but we have to constantly critique and challenge how it's evolving, and who is it doing, who is it that's putting these certain things into play, and how is technology coinciding with the music industry to scale these images out even quicker at a fast pace and worldwide. Hip hop is a global thing. And so how are we getting portrayed on the global scale as artists? It makes me think about what Sharon was saying when someone came up to her and said the N-word, but it was in a way that was supposed to be in this cool context. Well, that is how hip hop is getting portrayed, as it's that's just the thing you do in hip hop, and it's the cool thing, and it's totally fine. And so that's why we really do have to critique and challenge the power dynamics and see how the intersection of music and technology is like creating these spaces, or in a way like smearing the space in a sense, because there's so much meaning behind it, but also there's so many factors going. So yeah.
I love everything that you were saying. I do want to interject momentarily. I'll let you go, Mike, but I do want to say, given the potential international audience, and if this is your education into the community, we do need to define that the N-word is referring to a derogatory term when people were enslaved, African Americans were enslaved in the United States. There was a term that started with the letter N that was used to help keep people in check. And you're not a human, right? You were 3/5 human by law, and this term was used to describe people. And so part of the taking back and reclaiming space involves claiming that term, and it's used in hip hop a lot to say, with different modifications, that you can't do this to me. I'm breaking out of that, and I'm going to take what was used to oppress me, and I'm going to use it to empower myself and others. And that's not something that every single person can do. It comes from people that were a part of that struggle. So when we say the N-word, that's what we're referring to. So there's a lot there. There's a lot in hip hop. It is. So I just wanted to continue defining terms for the panel. So Mike, sorry for jumping in.
Absolutely, no problem at all. So I just want to build on so much of what folks were saying. Like, Pierce, that's where I was going to start, bro. Like, hip hop is in the DNA. Making is in the DNA, right? Like, and it's always been about technology. It's always been about technology. The oral, I mean, Dion, this in the movement, that's embodied cognition. That's embodied technology, right? Like, and so we're not talking about 40 years. I mean, I love Can't Stop, Won't Stop. Hip hop didn't start in the Bronx in the 70s. It started hundreds and hundreds of years before that. We're talking about the African diaspora coming up, the Great Migration. So you got to put it in a historical context in my mind. And so when I see a lot of making spaces, I see, like, I'm with Mari. I'm about, okay, how do we, and Sharon just like giving me life in the chat, right? Like, how do we disrupt the power dynamics? How do we, because so many making spaces. I heard, I was watching, because I mean, we're all nerds. This is a safe space, even though it's live on YouTube. If you're watching live on YouTube, you're a nerd too. It's okay. But I saw this thing on NASA, and they said, the big problem with NASA is it's pale, stale, and male. And I said, well, that's not a naturally occurring problem, y'all. Okay? This isn't the tides. So making spaces have become like hegemonic spaces, right? So boys, bots, and bolts is the issue. And in some ways, we've been pushing gender really, really well, but I think we got a whole long way to go in terms of race, class, ethnicity, and belonging, right? The space already exists. Hip hop is already a maker space, but so many folks don't think about it that way. And if we're talking about STEAM literacy, and don't put the A in a parentheses, okay, for me, okay, if this is literacy, and I think back, and I'm a teacher by trade, and I'm an English major once a long time ago, but I'm thinking about it in terms of like when Frederick Douglass was talking about, and I'm paraphrasing because I want to be respectful of time, but literacy, like he wasn't free until he could read and write, right? And if STEAM, if this is literacy and we're not broadening this for everybody, well, then what does that mean? That means that we're working towards liberation in my mind, right? And so if you're going to build the, Freire and Machado talk about build the road while you walk it, we're trying to like build with students the tools to build that road. So, it's not about like programming a drum machine. I love it. It sounds dope. It's not, it's about sharing. It's about community. It's about people. It's about emancipation. And what Pierce was talking about from that oral tradition down to splicing wires and making the turntable, right? To the graffiti on the train, right? That's science, that's STEM, that's repertoires of practice. And so what I look at is how are those technology, how are those embedded practices already in existence, and how can we work with youth to build those spaces internally that they already are practicing externally. Like, not like I'm a scientist, not that like corny, like, hi scientist, but like, no, this is it. This is art. This is science. I'm a genius, and not in that corny way, like in the for real way, no, this is centuries of practice coming through me. That's that, what do you call it? That's the Sankofa. That's go back and get it. That's understanding the past to place the present to build the future. And see, I'm feeling Joshua, like the Afrofuturism it's not just like science fiction plus Africa. It's building emancipatory space. It's disrupting politics. It is a hopeful thing. Hip hop for as problematic as it is, it's a hopeful thing because it envisions a future.
Wow.
Of people in the future, you know what I'm saying? And so I'm kind of just freestyling, but it's bricolage. It's all that stuff that we know builds a solid democratic community, but we got to explore what does that mean. And hip hop, the beautiful thing about hip hop for me is that it has done all of that stuff that multimodal. Hip hop's been multimodal since day one. Interactive, right? It's since day one. Right? It's been inclusive. It's been about people from day one. Not just the fact that people doing, Arduino are just catching up to, oh, we should think about people while we do this. Well, that's not hip hop. Okay? That's y'all catching up to us in the hip hop community. So we got to flip the script, so to speak. So that's just kind of some of the things I was thinking about. A.D. Carson, I don't know, and this out at UVA just had a hip hop album, the first peer-reviewed hip hop album come out. But his dissertation was called Owning My Masters. And he meant that every which way you can think of in terms of reclaiming power, reclaiming space, right? And how can we work with youth to engage that power that they have already and to articulate that and to bring that production space. It's called beat making. It's called production, right? And so that's kind of where I approach the work across try all of the elements, like in education, in these educational spaces, and give me the cutoff sign, because I'm tired. So time doesn't mean anything in 2020, right?
I'm going to take that as the cue, because one of the
okay.
questions.
All right. Yeah. Sorry.
That's a good transition. You set us up very well, because we do want to close on looking ahead. And we've heard some great things from the panelists, and what can you do, right? So we want to provide, what can we do moving forward? We just heard about 2020 being a lot of uncertainty around this year. And one of the questions that we want to ask any of the panelists to respond to is, as educators, what lessons from hip hop have you shared with the people you work with who may be feeling that unknowing or that unreadiness or uncertainty about the future because of the pandemic? So how has hip hop been able to help you project the future, to give some of that knowledge of self, sense of knowing in these current times? So does anyone want to take that question? And we have probably 5 minutes left, so before our closing thoughts.
I think a short answer to that is something that Mike just was talking about, which is helping people understand the power that they already have to construct the future. That we are not powerless, that hip hop has power, that they have power as creators of technologies, and as creators of hip hop as a technology, to move us past this present point into a future that they can imagine and then create.
I think on another end, for sure, is teaching our children, our students, the power, specifically through hip hop, the power of the God voice. It's where this esoteric knowledge that we have and that we're garnering, and being able to put it and project it out, whether that be in a cipher or kind of writing in the classroom, or developing understanding that your presence has power. And on the hip hop and the writing side specifically, like if you write it down, it manifests, it comes alive. You can write the future in present time in a real applicable way. And so giving our students these tools and these keys is going to be what helps them, build this future that we're looking for.
Excellent. So we had Dion and Rowdy, address if Sharon, Mike, or Mari want to have any thoughts about how might the future, how might people interested in this get more involved in moving forward. We can share those before I give one or two last closing comments.
Yeah, I just have like some scattered notes that include like expression and leadership is what comes to mind when I think about hip hop, and also the notion of just like the safe space that you can fail, right? And then like if that album doesn't do good, you just put out another one. You know what I mean? Kind of like deal, like that's not gonna, like, that one project is not gonna define you. You can kind of like, also you can like recreate yourself. Like how many times has Diddy done it? You know, like you can do it too, right? So exactly. So you can just kind of, so I guess like the what I would take back from that, or and what I try to give to like my students, or just like the folks that are around me, is like this piece of like this one thing that you put out into the universe it's going to forever grow and be, and it doesn't have to define you. It defines you in that, maybe like in that split second moment, but it's forever like changing and growing. The only everlasting truth is change, y'all. So like that's it. Well, we can't hear you,
no,
Mike.
we can't hear you, Mike.
Session is officially supposed to start at 1:20, so we still actually have.
All right, just act it out. I'll translate.
Or put it in the chat. Put it in the chat.
I think we are running out of time, everyone. So I do want to thank everyone for coming. Thank the wonderful panelists for all of your knowledge, and this intersection we're talking about. This is the beginning of a conversation. If you're tuning in, it's not the end of this one. I also want to thank the folks at FabLearn who have been giving us the space, who've been helping with the technology. Brian, who's been in the background, queuing up the questions and running the slides. So thank everyone who participated, and to all those who are watching, please stay involved. How can you, as an educator, do things? You heard mentioned to, you don't have to use master slave technology. If you teach computing, you could talk about lead follower. If you have GitHub, you can change,
Yes.
you know, like how you talk about these things. That's something we could all do moving forward. Hiphoped.com is a community that will embrace this conversation moving forward.
Absolutely.
Conversations, and you know, if you, we might have a way to get other links out to people, whether through this chat or if you registered, we might be able to get further resources because we want this to be sort of inspiring, not just a one-time panel. This was interesting, but to make it part of your mission, and how do these things intersect, help them intersect in your life. And those are just a few of the things that you can do moving forward. So thank you all. Hip Hop and Making panel out.
Thanks, guys. That was amazing.
Thanks so much for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank y'all for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian,
Thank
thank you so
you.
much. And everybody, yeah, please reach out. I would love to just hear about all the stuff y'all are doing, man. This is just so dope.
Yeah.
So dope.
Mike, for sure. Yeah, man. I just saw the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, we gotta connect. Dion, I don't know if you remember, but you came up to UW Madison to interview. And we and I like we hung out for a hot minute. So you never know when people are gonna like keep on crossing your path, and that's the most beautiful thing about this work. So it's good to see you again.
Yes, it's great to see you too. I would love to continue this conversation with all of you. This has been really great.
Same.
I stopped the recording too, so we could be after behind the curtain.